So I chose to do items A, B, C, and E on question 12 on page 397, I believe it was. Just ignore this at the top. This was the example page from the video. Over here, I do have the definitions of what N, I, Q, S, and R represent. So like I said, I did A, B, C, and E. So over here, I did the work. So for item A, it is x squared plus 1 equals 5. So the first thing I needed to do was get x by itself on this side of the equal sign. So I subtracted 1 from each side. That gives me x squared equals 4. To get x by itself, I have to square each side. When I square each side, I get x equals 2. We go over here. 2 is a natural number because it is a whole number you can count on your fingers. It is an integer because it is a whole number. It is also a quotient because you can do it as a fraction. You do 2 over 1 still equals 1. It is not an irrational number, and it is also a real number because 2 is a whole number. Then we move on to item B. 2x minus 1 equals 32. Add 1 on each side to get rid of the minus 1. That leaves us with 2x equals 33. To get x by itself on this side of the equal sign, we're going to divide each side by 2. That leaves us with x equals 16.5. So you can either have your answer as x equals 33 over 2 or simplify it to x equals 16.5 is what I did and what I'll be referencing to. So for item B, it is not a natural number because 16.5 you cannot count on your fingers. It is not an integer because it is not a whole number, it's a decimal. It can be a quotient because like I said, you can leave your answer as 33 over 2 instead of 16 over 5. It is not an irrational number, and it is a real number because even though 16.5 is a decimal, it's still considered a real number. Then for item C, we had x squared equals 3. To get x by itself, we have to square root each side. That's going to give you either x equals 1.732 or a square root of 3. So if we go over here, it is not a natural number because neither of those answers you can count on your fingers. It's also not an integer because it's not a whole number. It is not a quotient because it's either going to be a decimal or a square root, not a fraction. It is an irrational number because anytime you have the square root with a number, that's considered an irrational number. And it is a real number because this decimal is still considered a real number. Moving on to E, you have 3/4 x equals 0 over 4 with the line over the top, which means repeated. So since 3/4 is attached to x by multiplication, we're going to do the opposite by dividing. So you divide each side of the equal sign by 3/4. That gives you x equals 0.53 repeated. We go over here. It is not a natural number because you cannot do the decimals on your finger. It is not an integer because it's not a whole number. It can be a quotient because you can have the 0.4 repeated over 3/4. It is not an irrational number because decimals are real numbers. And then R, like I just said, decimals are real numbers. So we did put a check mark for the real numbers.